This isn't just a history lesson. I want you to think of this as a blueprint for solving impossible problems. Today, we're going to unlock the story of how a car company, a company that had never even seen a tank, ended up building them better and faster than anyone on Earth. And they did it by transforming the face of modern warfare, by treating a 30-ton armored vehicle like it was a family sedan. All right, let's dive in. So to really get the miracle of what happened, you first have to understand the nightmare they were facing. In 1940, as the world was just absolutely burning, the United States military was ranked a shocking 19th in the world. I mean, think about that. Not second, not fifth, 19th. They were ranked behind even Portugal. The army literally had more horses in its cavalry than it had tanks. America was a sleeping giant, and it was about to get a very, very brutal wake-up call.
So that's the real question, isn't it? When you are that far behind, when the enemy has a multi-year head start, how do you even begin to catch up? How do you transform from basically a non-player on the world stage to a global superpower, not in a generation, but in a matter of months? The answer, as improbable as it sounds, it all starts with a single 7-minute phone call.
Okay, I want you to imagine this for a second. You're KT Keller, you're the CEO of Chrysler. It's June of 1940. Your phone rings, and on the other end is William Knutson, the White House's industrial chief, and he doesn't waste any time. He asked if you can build 1,000 M3 Grant tanks. Now remember, you're a car guy. You build Plymouths and DeSotos, so you give the only honest answer you possibly can. I don't know. I've never even seen one.
Now, what's really terrifying about this slide is the sheer cold panic that's just baked into these numbers. As Knutson was making that phone call, Germany's 3,000-plus Panzers were pioneering the Blitzkrieg, literally crushing entire nations in a matter of weeks. The United States Army, in response, could field a grand total of 66 medium tanks. That's not an army, that's a rounding error. The imbalance was staggering.
And the existing system for building tanks? It was an absolute joke. The Army's own facility, the Rock Island Arsenal, was producing tanks at this glacial pace of about 3 per month. At that rate, fulfilling the order for 1,000 tanks would have taken them 277 years. But they were needed in 18 months. You see, this wasn't a problem you could solve by just asking people to work harder. The entire philosophy was wrong.
And right here, this is the turning point of the entire story. Keller and his team at Chrysler, they made a decision that was, frankly, as arrogant as it was brilliant. They decided they weren't going to learn the Army's way of building tanks. No, they were going to teach the Army the Detroit way of mass production. It was this incredible collision of two worlds, dusty military tradition versus ruthless industrial efficiency.
So, when Keller's engineers first went to visit the Army's arsenal, they were just appalled. I mean, they saw craftsmen painstakingly filing down huge armor plates by hand, custom-fitting every single part. No two tanks were exactly alike. Keller saw the problem instantly. He said, "This isn't manufacturing, it's sculpture, and you can't mass-produce a unique piece of art. You cannot win a World War I sculpture at a time."
The Army's method was just a complete dead end. It was the way things had always been done. But in the face of this existential threat, Keller offered a simple, powerful declaration that would really become the philosophical core of the entire American war effort. And this quote, "This just brilliantly illustrates the paradigm shift. We build them our way." This wasn't just some corporate pride talking. It was a diagnosis of the problem. Keller realized the problem wasn't military at its core, it was industrial. And nobody on Earth understood industrial problems better than the folks in Detroit.
So what did our way actually mean in practice? Well, it meant replacing parts that were close enough with precision-engineered components that were perfectly identical every single time. It meant getting rid of a static assembly where workers just swarm a single vehicle and replacing it with a moving assembly line that brought the work to the worker. A tank was no longer this bespoke, sacred weapon. It was just a product.
But look, to build tanks like cars, you first need a factory that thinks like a car factory. So they hired the legendary industrial architect Albert Kahn to design not just a building, but a machine for making tanks. They broke ground on a Michigan farm, and the race to build what would become the Detroit Arsenal was officially on. The pace was just staggering. I mean, look at this timeline. They went from a muddy field in September of 1940 to the first M3 tank rolling out the door in April of 1941. That's less than a year. They were designing the factory, building the factory, and starting to build tanks inside the factory, all at the exact same time. It's just incredible.
And this one little detail, for me, it just captures the sheer, raw determination of the whole project. To keep working through a brutal Michigan winter, with the factory still unfinished and no heating installed, they did something that sounds completely made up. They laid down railroad tracks and drove a full-size steam locomotive right onto the factory floor, and then they used its massive boiler to keep the workers from freezing. This was problem-solving on a completely different level.
And the improvisations just kept coming. So at one point, a shortage of proper aircraft-style tank engines threatened to halt the entire production line. So what did Chrysler engineers do? They invented this, the A57 multibank. They literally took 5 6-cylinder car engines and bolted them together around a common crankshaft. It was this bizarre, complex beast that the Army mockingly called a Rube Goldberg contraption. But you know what? It worked, and it meant the assembly line never ever stopped.
So, okay, the theory was radical. The execution was ingenious. But did the Chrysler method actually deliver? Well, let's move on to the numbers and see how this all built, because the data tells a story that literally changed the world. The trickle was about to become a tidal wave.
Just look at this ramp up. Even before Pearl Harbor, they were already at 4 tanks a day. By March of '42, right after America officially entered the war, they hit 12 a day. And then, just 4 months later, 18 brand new M4 Sherman tanks were rolling off the line every single day. That's a feat the Army's old system could barely manage in half a year.
And then came this number. This is the peak. In the single month of December 1942, the Detroit Arsenal produced 896 tanks. Let that sink in for a second. This one factory was now by itself outproducing the entire combined tank industry of Nazi Germany. This was the moment the arsenal of democracy stopped being a slogan and became an overwhelming, unstoppable force.
And the final tally is just as mind-boggling. By the time the war ended, the Detroit Arsenal had built over 22,000 tanks. And as you can see here, that single factory, born from one 7-minute phone call, was responsible for 1/4, a full 25% of all tanks produced by the United States during the entire war.
But you know, the number of tanks produced is almost beside the point. The real victory here was a victory of an idea. It's a legacy that fundamentally changed how we solve massive, complex problems, and it provides a powerful blueprint that we can still use today.
So the crucial point is this. The Arsenal proved that military hardware wasn't some sacred object. It was just a manufacturing challenge. It proved that engineering expertise could, and in fact should, override tradition when the stakes are high enough. It really birthed the modern military-industrial partnership and made that idea of an arsenal of democracy a terrifying reality for America's enemies.
And the secret weapon behind those insane production numbers was a culture of relentless optimization that they borrowed directly from the auto industry. You had engineers with stopwatches living on the factory floor, constantly refining the process, shaving seconds off every single task. And the result of that obsession was a staggering 300% increase in productivity. The system wasn't just built, it was constantly learning and getting better.
Which brings us right back to the blueprint itself. So, what can we take away from all this? First, you've got to reframe the problem. Chrysler didn't see a tank, they saw a heavy-duty vehicle. Second, design the whole system, not just the product. Third, apply what you already know how to do well to a new and different challenge. And fourth, and this might be the most important, never, ever believe that good enough is actually good enough.
Ultimately, this is the core lesson right here. The secret weapon that helped win the war wasn't necessarily a better tank. The German Panther was arguably a superior machine. The real weapon was a better system for making tanks. It was this uniquely American genius for treating an existential war as, at its heart, an industrial problem to be solved with overwhelming, brutal efficiency.
And that really leaves us with a final thought. This story proves that the things we often call impossible are really just problems we haven't looked at the right way yet. It's a methodology for tackling the insurmountable. So the question for us today is this: what is our generation's 1,000 tanks problem? And what could we achieve if we stopped admiring it and finally started building the machine to solve it?